"You don't belong here," the woman said. Those 4 words would change everything. She never thought her skin color would turn her new home into a battlefield. The morning had started like any other. Quiet, calm, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the hallway as she prepared for work. She was a 25-year-old woman, recently graduated and filled with hope and ambition, ready to take on the world. She lived in a small apartment in the heart of the city, far from her family but close enough to the life she had worked hard to build. Her friends knew her as confident, vibrant, a woman who could handle anything that came her way. To the world around her, she was just another face in the crowd, a person who blended in, her skin color not something that should ever matter. But deep down, she knew that her experiences as a black woman were different from her white counterparts. No one ever outright said it, but she could feel it. She could see it in the way people looked at her when she spoke in meetings, the way they paused before handing her a coffee, as though unsure if she were the one who had ordered it. It was subtle, something that others might miss, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. She had learned to ignore it, at least most of the time. She had a routine, a way of shielding herself from the unspoken tension that followed her. She kept her head down, focused on her work, smiled through the microaggressions, and walked quickly past the stares that followed her when she passed by. It wasn't perfect, but it was the life she had built. That morning, though, as she glanced at herself in the mirror before leaving her apartment, there was a sense of foreboding. She couldn't quite place it, but something felt different. As she boarded the bus, the usual shuffle of people pushing their way through the crowded aisle didn't seem as jarring as usual. The whispering behind her, the faint chuckles, the slight shift in tone whenever someone addressed her, it was all there. She'd experienced this before, but today it felt louder, more intrusive. She shook it off, blaming her nerves on the upcoming meeting she had at work. She had been promoted recently, moving into a managerial role, a step she was proud of. But as the bus rattled over potholes, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was waiting for her today. She arrived at her workplace, a mid-sized office building where the air was filled with the hum of machines and the soft murmur of coworkers. As she made her way to her desk, she offered a polite nod to those who greeted her, her mind already on the tasks ahead. Her supervisor, a middle-aged white man, had always been professional, though distant. He had never been overtly rude. But there was something about his attitude, his dismissive glances when she spoke up in meetings, or his tendency to overlook her ideas, that made her feel like she was always fighting for a seat at the table. She didn't let it get to her, though. She was used to the challenge. As the day progressed, the normal office chatter filled the air, the occasional buzz of the copier, the sound of phones ringing, and the low murmur of conversation. But then it happened. It was small at first. A comment about how she might be better suited for handling the more administrative tasks, a suggestion from her boss during a meeting where her input had been dismissed without even being considered. He laughed it off as though it were a joke, but the others in the room, her colleagues, mostly white, nodded in agreement, none of them even noticing the subtle insult. She felt her stomach churn as the realization settled in. It wasn't just a comment. It was a reminder of the unspoken bias that lurked beneath the surface, a bias that dismissed her ideas, her presence, her worth. She held her ground, keeping a calm exterior, but inside the sting was sharp. She had spent years working to get here, and yet this was what she was still up against. She excused herself to the restroom, hoping to regain her composure. As she washed her hands, her reflection in the mirror looked back at her, uncertain. She had dealt with this before, but today it was different. It was as if the weight of every slight, every sideways glance, every joke that wasn't funny, had all come crashing down on her at once. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, the one person who could always make her feel like herself. "You good? You seemed off this morning." She smiled softly, typing back, "Just a long day. I'll be fine." She looked at herself in the mirror one more time before walking out. She had to face the rest of the day, even if it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this time something bigger was coming. The next morning came with a quiet heaviness. the kind that settles in your chest before you even step out of bed. She told herself yesterday had just been a bad day. People said dumb things all the time. Maybe she was overthinking it. She tried to shake off the unease, dressed carefully, tying her hair neatly and slipping into her usual soft brown top with black trousers. The city outside buzzed with the noise of life, horns, footsteps, hurried conversations. But for her, the world felt muffled, distant. When she arrived at work, she noticed the shift almost immediately. Her coworkers' conversation stopped when she entered the room. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a sudden hush that carried weight. She caught the tail end of a whisper, her name followed by soft laughter. Her heart thumped in her chest as she walked past them, pretending not to notice. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and focused on her work. But then came the first real crack in the wall she had built around herself. Her supervisor called her into his office. The blinds were half drawn, sunlight slicing through in narrow beams. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "You've been doing fine work," he said, pausing before continuing. "But you need to be more approachable. People feel uncomfortable around you sometimes." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Uncomfortable? How?" He shrugged, pretending to search for the right words. "You come off as intense. Maybe try smiling more, being less defensive when people joke around." She swallowed hard, nodding slowly, even though her stomach twisted in disbelief. "I understand," she managed to say. He smiled as though he'd done her a favor. "Good. We want to keep the workplace positive, you know." When she walked out of the office, her co-workers were watching her. The man from accounting, who always seemed eager to talk to her before, looked away. The woman she usually had lunch with didn't meet her eyes. It felt like the walls were closing in. That evening, she stayed late, finishing a report no one else wanted to handle. As she walked to her car, the parking lot empty except for a few dim lights flickering overhead, she heard footsteps behind her, quick, deliberate. She turned slightly and saw him, her supervisor, leaning against his car, phone in hand. "Late night, huh?" he said casually. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Just finishing up." "Dedicated," he replied, his tone flat but his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "We need more of that around here." The comment lingered like smoke in the air. She felt the urge to leave, to get in her car and drive, but she didn't want to appear afraid. "Good night," she said quietly and walked away, her heart racing. When she got home, she sat in silence, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The city lights flickered behind her like ghosts. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just awkward, that maybe she was reading too much into it. But her gut knew better. The following week, the small slights grew louder. Her ideas in meetings were dismissed only to be repeated by someone else minutes later and praised. Emails she sent went unanswered. She overheard one coworker joking about how she probably got the job because of diversity quotas. When she confronted him, he laughed, hands raised, saying, "Relax. It was just a joke." She smiled weakly, walked away, and cried in the restroom stall. She hated that she cried. She hated that she felt powerless. But the thing about harassment is that it's not just the act, it's the erosion. It eats away at your confidence, piece by piece, until you start believing maybe you deserve it. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe it's your fault. She tried reporting it once. She went to HR, heart pounding, hands trembling as she described the comments, the dismissals, the feeling of being singled out. The HR representative, a woman with a polite smile, listened and nodded but said, "You know how office culture can be? I'm sure they didn't mean harm. Maybe you should try to fit in a little more, blend in." Blend in. The words echoed in her head as she walked out of the office. Blend in, as if her skin color was something she could peel off and leave behind. By Friday, she felt hollow. The stress was catching up to her. Sleep was a stranger, food tasteless, laughter distant. Every morning, she forced herself to get up, to keep going, because that's what she had always done, keep going. That night, she attended a neighborhood association meeting. She'd recently moved into a new apartment complex run by a homeowners association. She thought maybe, for once, being part of something would help her feel less alone. The room was filled with cheerful chatter, mostly older white residents exchanging small talk. She smiled and greeted them politely, but the looks she got were cautious, curious. The woman at the front, Patricia, the HOA chair, greeted her with a tight smile. "Oh, you must be the new resident," Patricia said, her voice dripping with a kind of politeness that felt sharp-edged. "We were wondering when you'd show up." "Yes," she replied softly. "Just moved in last month." "Lovely," Patricia said. "We've had issues before with noise, parking, that sort of thing. I trust you'll be mindful of our community rules." The implication stung. "Of course," she said. Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. We value peace and order here." The meeting went on, but her words echoed in the back of the victim's mind. Later that evening, when she returned to her apartment, she found a notice taped to her door. "Parking violation," it read. "Your vehicle was parked too close to the curb." But she knew it wasn't true. Her car was perfectly within the lines. It was the beginning of something she didn't yet understand but could already feel creeping in. The next morning, Patricia stood outside with two other HOA members, whispering as she walked by. Their eyes followed her like shadows. "Some people just don't fit in," Patricia muttered loudly enough to be heard. She kept walking, but her hands were trembling. The harassment had followed her home now. It wasn't just at work anymore. It was everywhere. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew thicker, wrapping around her like invisible chains. Every time she stepped outside her apartment, she could feel Patricia's gaze, sharp and disapproving, like she was waiting for her to make a mistake. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the neat suburban lawns, she returned home from work to find Patricia standing near her car with a clipboard in hand. The same two HOA members stood beside her. "Excuse me," Patricia said, her tone clipped and condescending. "Do you know you've parked in a restricted area?" She frowned, glancing around. "This is my usual spot." "It's marked for residents." Patricia crossed her arms. "We've received complaints. Several neighbors said you've been having guests over late at night. This is a quiet neighborhood, and we don't tolerate disturbances." "That's not true," she replied, her voice steady but cold. "I've had no visitors." Patricia's lips twisted into a smug smile. "Perhaps you didn't notice the noise yourself." The way she said "you people" without saying it made her stomach tighten. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, but she kept her composure. "If you have a problem, you can speak to management," she said, turning to walk away. Patricia took a step forward, blocking her path. "Don't walk away when I'm speaking to you," she snapped, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to peek out from their windows. Her two companions smirked, enjoying the spectacle. "You think you can just move here and ignore the rules? Not everyone gets special treatment." Her heart pounded. The words stung. Special treatment. She knew exactly what Patricia meant. It wasn't about noise or parking. It was about her. Her presence in this neighborhood offended them. She looked Patricia in the eye, her voice trembling but firm. "I pay the same fees you do. I follow the same rules. You don't get to treat me like I don't belong here." Patricia's face hardened. "Watch your tone, or what?" she said, her anger finally breaking through the years of restraint. "You'll call security? File another fake complaint? Go ahead." The air grew still, thick with tension. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Patricia's smile returned, cold and venomous. "Maybe I will." The next morning, a letter slid under her door, a notice of violation for aggressive conduct toward HOA members. She laughed bitterly. Aggressive conduct. All she had done was defend herself. She took the letter to the property office, demanding to speak with the manager. But the receptionist only shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The HOA handles these matters independently. You'll have to attend a disciplinary hearing next week." That week was one of the longest of her life. At work, the stress had started showing. Her supervisor's comments grew sharper, his tone less professional. "You seem distracted lately," he said one afternoon, tapping his pen against the desk. "You should be careful not to let your personal life affect your performance." She wanted to scream, to tell him how it felt to be constantly pushed, doubted, watched. But she bit her tongue. She couldn't afford to lose her job, not now. When the day of the hearing came, she walked into the small community hall with her head held high. Patricia sat at the center of a table with 4 other HOA members, their faces expressionless, their eyes filled with quiet judgment. "You're here because of multiple complaints regarding your behavior," Patricia began, her voice falsely sweet. "Several residents have noted that you've been confrontational, loud, and disrespectful." "That's a lie," she said, her voice firm. "You've been targeting me since I moved here." "Please," Patricia interrupted, feigning politeness. "We're not here to argue. We just want to maintain harmony." "Harmony?" she said, her tone cracking with restrained fury. "You mean silence. You want me to stay quiet while you humiliate me. You want me to pretend it's normal to be followed, accused, and treated like I don't belong." The room fell silent. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at Patricia. But Patricia didn't flinch. "If you can't comply with the community's expectations, we'll have to consider eviction," she said calmly, tapping her pen against the clipboard. The words hit like a blow. Eviction. She had worked her whole life to build something stable, and now they wanted to take it away because she dared to exist where they thought she shouldn't. Her hands trembled, but her voice grew stronger. "You can write all the letters you want. I'm not leaving. I won't be quiet anymore." Patricia opened her mouth to reply, but before she could speak, another voice came from the back of the room. "That's enough." Everyone turned. It was Mr. Davis, an older black resident who had lived there for years, someone she'd only seen in passing. He stepped forward, his gaze firm. "I've lived here long enough to know what this is," he said, his voice steady. "You've been harassing her because of her color. Don't act like this is about noise or parking. We've all seen it." Patricia's face flushed with anger. "That's not true," she snapped. "We treat everyone equally." "No, you don't," he said. "You just hide it behind paperwork and smiles."